When I was in first grade, there was one particular day in which I had told my mother about something that was rather comical that had happened at recess. And I had just gotten home from school, and I was telling her about my day, as I always did. It was very routine. And she was at her writing desk, and I was relaying this funny little activity that I had seen on the playground, in which some of my fellow first grade classmates were taking turns extending their arms above their shoulder and saying, "Heil Hitler." And it looked like a funny little game, and so I had mentioned it to my mom, and she stopped what she was doing, and she had this look of horror on her face. She was just horrified when I mentioned this to her, and she stopped what she was doing. She pulled me aside. She was in her bedroom, and she sat on her bed with me, and she told me about the Holocaust, and told me about what had happened to her and her family and what this all meant. And I was in first grade. I had no idea that something like this could have happened to my mother, the center of my universe, and that anything like this could have happened to anyone for that matter, but certainly not my mother.
Well, it's still pretty clear in my mind. And yet I don't remember. I think I stayed in bed longer than I had planned to. And all of a sudden there were buses around the house. And we just had one tiny little room, which was shared by different families. So the buses stopped, and I think some SS men charged into the room and started interrogating everybody. Yes, that's when they started the children's roundup. And my room was shared with other families. There was a grandmother and a grandfather, and they kept their little granddaughter, whom they were trying to hide under the blanket, but to no avail. So I guess I don't know if it was SS or Ukrainians who yanked the little girl out of bed and put her on the bus. No, but none of the children survived.
She and her parents were in a ghetto it was a Kovno ghetto in Lithuania, and many of her family members had already been murdered. Some were forced to dig their own graves and then were shot. Some were taken away. Some had been sent on death marches. Just terrible, terrible things. Very few of her family members, she found out after the war, had survived. But in her particular case, after many horrific events that occurred in the ghetto, these were aktions, or different events that took place in the ghetto that were very horrifying. Her father had found a way for her to escape. My mother escaped and went into hiding, for the remainder of the war, and her father was sent to Dachau concentration camp and survived. Her mother did not survive. Well, growing up in the 60s and 70s in Fort Worth, Texas, it was a very lovely place to grow up, but anti-Semitism still existed, and that coupled with the fact that no one discussed the Holocaust. I had never heard anyone speak of it, and it was not part of polite conversation. And perhaps that was a function of the generation that had started to resume their lives after World War II. They wanted to focus on starting anew and not looking back. Because it wasn't discussed openly, and because I knew of this, I felt like this was a family secret about my mother that was just so terrible and sad that I didn't speak of it except for on occasion to a very close friend. Over the years, one or two people that I would disclose my personal family secret to her. I have one child who was, on the day that she was born, my mom was at the hospital, and the moment that my mom saw her daughter's daughter, my mom just beamed like I had never seen before. And she got this blissful smile on her face. And all these years later, my mom still will just beam when she sees or talks to my daughter. And not that this one child could replace all the lives that were lost, but that she represented hope and a future and happiness and the continuation of her family.
We're playing Somewhere Over the Rainbow.
Isn't she edible?